In an enchanted realm, an oddity stirs, beckoning the curious. Meet Jessii, once ensnared, now awakened, waiting to be yours.
There's a legend about a boy in a sheet ghost costume that chooses 3 houses to visit on Halloween every single year. You are warned to not give him candy when he rings your doorbell. And you're probably listening to this and wondering, how will you know it's him? Especially because there might be hundreds of kids wearing the exact same costume. Well, here are a few hints that they give us. When he rings the doorbell, he will step all the way back to the steps of your porch, waiting for you to walk out of your house to bring him over some candy. Never leave your house if this happens to you. Once you leave your door frame, it's done. He holds a small pumpkin-shaped candy bag out in front of him and doesn't say a word. He doesn't say trick or treat, and he won't answer any questions that you ask him. So once again, close your door and wait for him to leave. You won't be able to see any eyes behind the sheet that he's wearing, only darkness where they should be. So you're probably also wondering, what happens if you do leave your house and give him candy? It is said that he moves very quickly, and as soon as you step out onto your porch, he will run behind you and into your house. He's basically just waiting for the way to be cleared. You won't be able to find him once he's in there. He will stay hidden until he finds exactly what he wants. He apparently will take the thing that is most dearest to your heart that is in your house. There was a story about one lady that heard her doorbell ring around 11 p.m., way after the time trick-or-treaters usually come. And when she opened the door, she saw the boy in the ghost costume standing far away from her, gesturing to his candy bag. So she felt sorry for him. She walked all the way over to where he was standing and offered him the rest of the candy that she had. But as soon as she got close, he quickly ran behind her into her house and up the stairs. She went after him but didn't see him anywhere. She only heard the shuffling of his footsteps. And after looking around her house for an hour, she assumed that this boy must have left. But a few days later, she noticed that the ring that always sat on her bedside table was gone. It was her mother's wedding ring that she gave to her right before she passed away. It was the one thing of most meaning to her in the house. Then there was this story about a man that had his doorbell ring around 7:30 p.m., which was a pretty normal time, and he heard a group of children yell, "Trick or treat!" He opened the door and saw about 5 kids grouped together in princess costumes, Batman, zombies, but at the very back of the group, he saw a boy in a ghost costume. He was the only one not talking. While the other kids were jumping around and giggling, he was standing completely still behind them.
"Why don't we give the little guy in the back some candy first?"
he said, just thinking that the boy was probably shy or something. So he stepped out from his door and reached around the other kids to give this boy some candy. And once he looked away to give some candy to the other kids, the boy dashed right into his house. The man shouted after him and searched for wherever he went. And a couple hours later, he realized that his dog had gone missing. And I'm sure you can guess who has him now. And yeah, that's the legend about the boy in the ghost costume, so be careful this Halloween. I am definitely handing out candy at my house, and I'm a little bit scared. Obviously, don't stop giving candy to anyone who's dressed as a ghost. I would feel really bad if you did that and someone was left out. But if they are standing all the way back at the end of your porch, not talking, and they run towards your house, you know it's him. Alright, the second story is called The Voice in the Desert. 2 young men in their 20s named Josh and Dan went on a camping trip together in a desert in New Mexico on Halloween. They didn't take much with them besides sleeping bags, food, and materials for a fire. And after they cooked their dinner, they fell asleep as they gazed up into the starry night sky. Now, the beauty and peace of the trip was very short-lived, because in the very early, dark hours of the morning, Josh was startled awake from what sounded sounded like Dan's voice coming from outside of his tent. It sounded extremely frantic. The voice was saying,
"Come here, quickly, quickly, come look."
So sleepy and confused, Josh got up to see what the heck his friend was talking about, and he heard it again.
"Hurry, hurry, come quickly."
It sounded really unnatural, like it was in a perfect repetition. So Josh took a few steps forward and then someone grabbed him from behind. He turned around to see Dan with his finger in front of his mouth. He was warning Josh to keep very, very quiet. They rolled up their sleeping bags and quickly left. And they still to this day do not know who or what was calling them to leave their tents and go off into the darkness. Something was trying to lure Josh into the desert that wasn't Dan, but had Dan's voice. So yeah, that really creeps me out. I hate hearing stuff like that. No thank you. Okay, so before I get into the creepy story, let's talk about the history of candy corn. Now, candy corn is a very controversial candy. You either love it or you hate it. There's just no in between, but people really associate it with Halloween. So I have a little experiment that I want you to participate in. If you're watching right now and you actually like candy corn, please comment the orange heart. And if you do not like it, comment the ghost emoji. I'm gonna see which one there is more of. And I gotta say, I'm with the ghosts. I don't like this candy very much. I think it's just too sweet for me and the texture's really weird, but some people really like it and I wanna know who those people are. Don't be ashamed. Candy corn's origins are a little iffy, but it seems to have come out around in the 1880s, a time when candy companies were molding treats into the shape of pumpkins, chestnuts, turnips, and other agricultural products. And it was the Jelly Belly company that really brought this candy to fame. But what's strange is that in 1898, they began marketing it as chicken feed. That was the original name for candy corn. I feel like it's kind of strange to call a candy that, but people loved it. They thought it was so cool that you could actually eat something that sounded like it was meant for animals. A little strange. Candy corn from the 1920s displayed a rooster and the motto, "King of the Candy Corn Fields." And in the early 20th century, candy corn was known as penny candy. So this was the type of candy that kids could buy a lot of for a very small amount of money. National Candy Corn Day is October 30th, and 9 billion pieces of candy corn are produced each year. And I know some of you watching eat it, and you love it. Tell me if it's you. Okay, so let's talk about the girl with the candy corn eyes. There's a legend from the 1980s about a little girl that went missing while she was out trick-or-treating one Halloween night. She was 10 years old, and her parents thought that she was old enough to go out trick-or-treating by herself as long as she was back in the house by 9 p.m. And as you can guess, she did not return home, and her parents really began to worry. They walked through the neighborhood searching for her but couldn't find her anywhere, so they got the police involved and they were able to track her movements to a nearby forest. Although they were never able to find her, they did find her trick-or-treat bag, which was a pumpkin. And the really odd thing about it is that it was filled to the brim with candy corn, and only candy corn. There was no other candy. It was the strangest thing they had ever seen, because usually you don't go trick-or-treating and people just hand you like a huge handful of candy corn and just drop it in your basket. It was like unpackaged single candy corns. There was also a trail of candy corn leading to a river in the forest. They wondered if maybe she had fallen in and drifted off, but still no sign of her was ever found. And the legend goes that since her disappearance and assumed death, she shows up every Halloween night to any kid that had gone trick-or-treating. She'll appear before you when your parents have gone to bed, and you'll know it's her because she has 2 pieces of candy corn instead of eyes. She'll pull one off her face and hand it to you, and she wants to trade you a candy corn for one of your pieces of candy that you found while trick-or-treating. And if you accept her offer and make the trade, she will leave without a word. She won't bother you, she won't speak to you, she won't do anything. But if you refuse her, or run away, or call for help, she'll grab your arm and drag you into the depths of the forest before you have a chance to even realize what's happening, leaving a pile of candy corn in place of where she took you. And it's said that for any brave souls that really want to meet her but are too old for trick-or-treating, it is said that any time during the month of October, if you lie down in bed at midnight and put 2 pieces of candy corn over your eyes, she may just come to visit you. Just make sure that you have candy that you can trade with her if she does, because you know what happens if you don't. So be careful. And yes, I do feel like we should really try this on the vlog channel, even though I'm kind of scared to do it. And lastly, we have a story called Walking Home that I do feel like has to do with the girl with the candy corn eyes. I found this story about a guy that was walking home at night after a Halloween party. The street was empty and quiet, and he suddenly started hearing footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw this girl standing far down the road. She was holding a trick-or-treat bag, and he thought that she must have been wearing some kind of mask because her face looked very strange, especially her eyes. But it was so hard to see her facial features from her standing so far away. She was kind of a silhouette in the fog down the street, and she began walking slowly towards him, holding her trick-or-treat bag out in front of her and slowly pulling something out of it and dropping it on the road. And every step she took, she would drop something, almost like she was leaving a trail of candy. He called out to her, but she didn't answer. She just kept getting closer and closer, and he felt like he was frozen in fear. Finally, he began running home, not looking back. And the next morning when he was walking to school, he could see a trail of candy corn on the pavement. And that's how that one ends. So obviously he had some sort of encounter with the candy corn-eyed girl. Thankfully, she did not get close enough to him to offer her one of her candy eyes. He got away just in time. But I really did find this story really interesting, and I had to tell you guys, especially around Halloween. We're gonna start off with the history of trick-or-treating before we get into the very creepy stuff. Have you ever wondered, why do children dress in costumes and knock on strangers' doors to ask for treats on Halloween? It has been a tradition in the United States and other countries for over a century, and the origins of this tradition are not fully known, but traces of it can be identified in ancient Celtic festivals, early Roman Catholic holidays, medieval practices, and even British politics. So back in 1000 AD, the church designated November 2nd to be called All Souls Day. And it was basically a day to honor the dead. So poor people would go and visit the houses of wealthier families, and they would receive these pastries that were called soul cakes in exchange for a promise to pray for the souls of the homeowner's dead relatives. Now, this whole practice was known as souling, and it was later taken up by children who would go door to door asking for gifts such as food, money, stuff like that. In Scotland and Ireland, young people took part in a tradition called guising, which is where they would dress up in costumes and accept offerings from various households. And instead of offering to pray for those people's dead loved ones, they would instead sing for them. Or they would perform some sort of trick before they claimed their food or candy. And the gifts they would receive were usually fruit, nuts, or coins. By the 1920s, however, pranks had become the Halloween activity of choice for rowdy young people. So this all started off as a very innocent thing, but later on these older teenagers took it to another level. One theory suggests that excessive pranks on Halloween led to the widespread adoption of an organized community-based trick-or-treating tradition in the 1930s. And today, Americans spend an estimated $2.6 billion on candy on Halloween, and it has become the nation's second largest commercial holiday. And that's basically how trick-or-treating began. I had no idea it started off as something called souling, where you would like trade and pray for someone's relative and they would give you like candy or food. So before I move on to the creepypasta that you've all been waiting for, I just want to briefly talk about a weird trick-or-treating experience that I had when I was a kid. Now, my dad used to take my sister and I trick-or-treating every single year. And I think when we turned about 10 or 11 years old, they let us go out on our own. We made sure we had this little group of friends with us, and we could only go trick-or-treating around the block of our house just so we stayed relatively close to home. But I remember there was this one house that looked so scary with all these decorations and spooky sounds and flashing lights, and when we went up and rang the doorbell, this man dressed up as an evil scientist opened the door, and he asked us if we wanted to come inside his house. And obviously we were like, what? What do you mean? And he told us that he had created this huge haunted house maze in his garage, and the only way to get there was through his house to like the door to the garage inside his house. And because we were all very young and stupid, we followed him inside. And he was right, there was this huge decorated creepy maze in his garage, and it was actually really cool. But we also felt super weird being in a stranger's house. Like usually when you go trick-or-treating, you're not offered inside. And I remember when I got home and told my parents what happened, happened, they were so mad at us. I'm pretty sure I was grounded for like a month. Because guys, you don't just wander into a stranger's house, trick-or-treating or not. I don't care what occasion it is. Because what if this guy had bad intentions? You literally cannot know somebody by just meeting them for like 2 seconds. And yeah, maybe he was just a really nice man who loved Halloween, loved making kids have a fun time, but you don't know. You don't know. So yeah, never under any circumstances do that without a parent present or like a parent's permission, because this whole thing has stuck with me like throughout my life. I think back to that one day and I was like, whoa. What if something bad happened? And honestly, many kids over the years have gone missing on Halloween. Like they literally just disappeared. And I'm gonna make a whole other video on that topic alone. But yeah, just be safe. Please be safe. All right, so let's get into the creepypasta about the house you should never trick-or-treat at. This story is called 6 Cobbleway Crescent. This story is about a house in a neighborhood that everyone feared. It sat there looking vacant, with no one mowing the grass or taking care of the property. And it had been that way for at least 20 years. And pretty much all of the parents who lived in that neighborhood told their kids to never go trick-or-treating there. The story went that back in the late 90s, there was an old woman and her husband that lived there. Now, this old man was caring for his wife who apparently had this really terrible illness and she couldn't do a lot of things on her own. So she would need to have his assistance during the day. Well, one day he unfortunately passed away and doctors and people came to this woman's house offering to help her because they knew about her illness and they sort of just wanted to reach out to her. But she refused every single person's help. She wanted to do everything on her own. And on the first anniversary of her husband's death, she went missing and no one saw her again. Except for this one time in 1999. This group of teenagers thought it would be funny to go trick-or-treating at this old abandoned house. And by trick-or-treating, it meant they were gonna go there and break in. They arrived at the door and knocked on it and started peering in all the windows. It was dark and layers of dust was covering all the furniture and the floors. They kicked the door in and started walking around with their flashlights, calling out to the ghosts of the people who used to live there. After exploring for a while, they got bored and decided to go home. But just as they were about to leave, they heard tapping on the floorboards, followed by these creaky footsteps. It almost sounded like someone was walking towards them with a cane. Hello? They called out. But the only thing they heard in response was a creepy, heavy breathing coming from another room. Whatever it was slowly walking towards them. And as they stood in the doorway, they saw this bent over figure turning the corner towards them in the back hallway. It looked like an old woman grasping onto her cane. Her head was facing down to the floor and her gray hair was covering her eyes. Mrs. Pelham? They asked in shock because she was supposed to have been missing. But instead of a response, this woman's head slowly lifted from the floor to reveal these 2 large yellow eyes. And her mouth was almost curled into a smile. "We thought you were missing," one of them said.
Missing?
She finally said with a hiss.
I've never left.
And with that, she started to run at them with this unnatural pace. She let go of her cane and her arms hit the floor as she leaped across the house like an animal on all fours. The group ran as fast as they could down the street back to their houses, and they told everybody they knew about what happened there. The police arrived at the house the next morning and could find no sign of Mrs. Pelham. And since that day, it was known in the town to never go and visit that house, especially on Halloween. So that's the end of the story. It is so creepy. So yeah, if you're ever trick-or-treating and you see like a broken down house, an abandoned house, don't go there. The Wonka bar is a fictional bar of chocolate from the Wonka Candy Company. In the movie, the Wonka bar is supposed to be the creamiest and sweetest candy bar in the world. Not much is known about how the Wonka bars are made, except that the chocolate is mixed by waterfall in the chocolate waterfall in the chocolate room. Now, in the book, there's actually said to be about 200 different flavors of this Wonka bar, and Wonka bars actually started to be sold in real life after the success of the movie. But then in 2010, they actually discontinued because of bad sales. So people say it's really hard to find them now. So if you find a Wonka bar out in the wild, it is rare. Now somehow, a few weeks ago, my dad came across one while he was visiting a small town in Ontario, Canada. So he bought it and he gave it to me. And so I'm probably gonna try it out over on the vlog channel because apparently, rarely, there will be a golden ticket inside. Do you think I have the golden ticket? We're gonna find out. The golden ticket is the pass that allows the owner to get into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. In the movie, 5 golden tickets were hidden in Wonka bars and shipped out into countries all over the world. And the search for these bars became like a worldwide mania. Everyone was trying to get their hands on it. And each kid in the movie who found this golden ticket was this huge press sensation. And in case you're wondering, this is exactly what the golden ticket says. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket from Mr. Willy Wonka. Present this ticket at the factory gates at 10 o'clock in the morning of the first day of October and do not be late. You may bring with you 1 member of your own family, and only 1, but no one else. In your wildest dreams, you could not imagine the marvelous surprises that await you. So right now, pause and comment down below who you would bring if you got this golden ticket. Who in your life would you take to go and visit the Willy Wonka chocolate factory? If I had to choose, I would probably pick my sister. I'm sure she would love to go. Anyways, this video is not supposed to be about Willy Wonka and the chocolate factory in any way. I just wanted to give you some background information in case you didn't know what a golden ticket was or what a Wonka bar was, which if you don't, where have you lived? I'm actually about to tell a much creepier story about a boy who got a Wonka bar in his trick-or-treat bag on Halloween. The story is called The Fake Golden Ticket. As you can imagine, this story takes place on Halloween night. In fact, it was a very dark and stormy Halloween night when a boy named Daniel was out trick-or-treating all by himself. Now, he was a very shy boy, he didn't have many friends, and his parents were always busy with work. So every single year, he went trick-or-treating by himself, making sure that he stayed safe. Guys, always travel in 2s or more. He noticed that there was a house right at the end of the street that no one was going to. The lights weren't on and it had no Halloween decorations. Now, Daniel did not realize that when people don't have decorations or their lights on, it usually means that they're not giving out candy. He just thought that maybe this house was just mysterious and people should go and trick-or-treat there. So he slowly walked up the driveway and onto their porch. He stared at the large decorative door knocker. It looked like something out of the 1800s, and he slowly reached to knock 3 times. Now, he waited there for about 3 minutes thinking that nobody was coming. And just as he turned to leave, he heard these slow footsteps heading towards the door. The door slowly opened, and standing in the doorway in the darkness was this old man. He had this gray beard and these tired eyes, and he said to the boy,
Does it look like I care about Halloween, little boy?
The boy had no idea what to say, so he just shook his head, and the man continued,
Then get off my porch right now.
The boy started to run away when suddenly the old man called to him one more time and said,
Do you like Willy Wonka, little boy?
And then tossed what looked like a large chocolate bar out onto his lawn and shut the door so hard that the ground rumbled. The boy walked over to the chocolate and saw that it was a Wonka bar. Now, he was excited because he had always loved the movie Willy Wonka, so he put it into his trick-or-treat bag and headed home. When he got to his room and dumped the candy out onto his bed, he decided that he would open the Wonka bar first. And to his surprise, he saw the golden ticket flickering in the light as he unwrapped it. But instead of the ticket having that classic writing that you see in the movie, it just had an address, a date, and a time. And it was just scribbled on the ticket in this sloppy writing, looked like it was in permanent marker. Now, if you guys have seen my other videos about the surprise party and the tea party invitation, you know that you should never just go to a random address without knowing what it is, without somebody with you. But because this is a creepy story, you know the boy went to this address. And no, he didn't take anybody with him. His parents were so busy working, as I said, so he went alone. Now, the address took him to an old abandoned school. Why is it always an abandoned place? The school looked like it had been untouched for about 30 years. The boy walked up to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. He tried to get in through a window, but they were all barred over. It seemed like this place was pretty well protected from anybody breaking in. So he walked around to the back where an old fence and playground sat untouched. And he then saw something extremely bizarre. In the very middle of the playground was what looked like a very large sinkhole. When he got closer and leaned over to look down, all he saw was darkness. "Hello?" he called down. And almost immediately he was answered with screams. It sounded like hundreds of screaming children inside of this sinkhole. He ran home and told his parents, who called the police, but when they arrived at the old school, the hole was filled with dirt and the old man was never found. They even kicked down this old man's door to try and find him, but the house was completely empty. There wasn't even furniture inside of it. So yeah, this story is just very bizarre. Yet another invitation or ticket to some event that doesn't actually exist, or it takes you to somewhere dangerous. So never ever do this. First, we have one about milk duds. Back in 2014, a mother from Ohio discovered bullets in her 4-year-old son's boxes of milk duds. What made this an even more troublesome discovery was that her son's preschool had handed them out during a trick-or-treat event. So he didn't even just go to like a stranger's house, the school literally handed these out. Now, when this was like a huge news thing going around all over the world, the school did not want to comment, but it is important to note that parents brought the candy from home to bring to the school where it was then handed out. So one of these kids' parents put bullets in them, which is so disturbing. Next, we have one about rusty nails. This is another 2014 Halloween candy horror story where a young boy from Washington found a rusty nail in his Halloween candy. And it's not like he found it while he was like pulling apart his candy. He had actually eaten it and it poked a hole in his cheek. Fortunately, he was not seriously injured, but it could have been a lot worse. The mother of the young boy's friend proceeded to open up the rest of his trick-or-treat candy and found several other pieces of metal inside of them. These included nails, staples, watch parts, which is so random. Like, who is doing this stuff? It is so evil. Then we have one about heart-shaped candy. There was this man named William V. Shine, who was this quiet dentist from California, and on Halloween of 1959, he handed out 450 pieces of candy to trick-or-treaters that happened to be heart-shaped candy coated with laxatives. And no one knew why he did this. This too was just so random. But if he did it to make kids sick, he did succeed, unfortunately. 30 kids fell ill from this, and parents traced the candy back to this man, who literally ran away from police when he found out they were tracking him. They did eventually catch him, thank goodness, but what a messed up thing to do. Then we have one about ant poison. In 1964, Long Island resident Helen Pafil was apparently annoyed by all the children she deemed too old for trick-or-treating, so she decided to make special treats for them, just because she thought they were trick-or-treating at too old of an age. So she covered a bunch of things in arsenic, in ant poison, and what's so creepy is that she actually drew a skull and crossbones on all of the ones that she tampered with, almost to like give them a clue or a hint, which is also really messed up. Thankfully, no kids ate any of these. It was found out before anything happened, but it could have been a really deadly situation. She, of course, was then charged with child endangerment, but what's so weird is that she told police that she never intended to harm those kids. Excuse me? Ant poison? Then we have one about candy apples. In 1963, there was 13 cases of children in New Jersey finding razor blades in apples they received while trick-or-treating. Now, in 75% of these cases, the children were uninjured, which still means that some were, which is awful. But after looking more into these cases in 1972, it was determined that nearly all claims were false, and the children had put the razors in the apples themselves to propagate the urban legend of dangerous things being in Halloween candy. But not every single case was a hoax, so some did actually happen. Then we have M&Ms, which is my favorite candy. I don't like to think about this. In 2013, a 12-year-old Pennsylvania boy opened a miniature bag of M&Ms to discover a 1-inch disposable razor. And what's so creepy is that the package didn't show any signs of tampering. Like, it was completely closed, sealed off. Like, how did this happen? Then we've got Twizzlers. I feel like we're covering every single Halloween candy. In 2018, 2 children trick-or-treating in Marshfield, Massachusetts, found sewing needles hidden within their Twizzlers candy. None of the children were injured, but Marshfield police did tell everyone to throw out all Twizzler candy just to be safe. Then we've got Tootsie Rolls. In Buffalo, New York, a woman found a shard of glass that had been delicately placed inside of a Tootsie Roll, which certainly isn't the easiest thing to do. The woman was celebrating Halloween with her family, but luckily managed to see the glass inside the candy before she ate it. excited. So she got extremely lucky, but obviously this was very intentional. Then we have lighters. Lighters are really dangerous around kids. They can be easily sparked, and some kids may even try to set fires. And there have been numerous cases all over the country of lighters being put inside of bags of candy. So like there was all these news articles going around telling parents to look out for lighters in their kids' Halloween bags. And lastly, we have one about Christmas lights, which I know sounds very surprising. Parents from Northwest Arkansas reported in 2015 that individual Christmas lights had been found in their children's candy. These small bulbs can be seriously dangerous if a child swallows them, and their colors mean that they can look just like pieces of candy. So this is obviously a really nasty thing to do to kids as well. And I know how sharp Christmas lights can be, because yesterday when I was putting up my Halloween decorations, I had like those little Christmas lights, but they were like orange for Halloween, and one cut my finger. I have like this huge scar down my finger. So imagine like having that in your mouth. No. But before I get into those scary stories, I really wanted to briefly talk about Halloween costume history. I did a whole video before on how scary the old vintage costumes looked back then, and that was because most people used to hand make them themselves, and no offense to those people, sometimes looked a little bit too scary. But there's actually a real reason behind why we even wear Halloween costumes to begin with. Back in the day, to essentially trick the ghosts on Halloween, people would wear scary costumes as a disguise, so they would be mistaken for spirits themselves and left alone by the dead. Because like I said before, people believed that on Halloween the veil between the living and the dead was broken, and the dead would like walk among us. So people thought that if they looked like the creepy spirits and literally dressed up like them, the spirits wouldn't recognize them as humans and would leave them alone. I literally had no idea about this. I thought that people just wore costumes because it was fun, which is what it's become nowadays. But back then, they were literally trying to disguise themselves from the ghosts. There's also a reason why black and orange are like the colors of Halloween. Like people wear black and orange makeup and Halloween costumes and black and orange decor everywhere. And those two colors started because apparently black represents the death of summer and orange represents the autumn harvest season. So those two together are Halloween in a nutshell. And that's why we always associate those two color combinations with Halloween. Isn't it interesting how every holiday has like color combos? Like Valentine's Day is like red and pink, Christmas is green and red, Halloween is black and orange, Easter is like pastel colors. I love it. So the first story I want to talk about is this man who thought he saw black-eyed children come to his door on Halloween. Now this story is very, very similar to the babysitting story that I told you guys a couple videos ago. So I'm going to talk about it very briefly just because it's so similar, but oh my gosh, this one is scarier. So it's about this guy who was handing out candy on Halloween. It got really late, so he decided to go to bed. Right before he went to bed, he heard a knock on his door. When he opened the door, he saw two children standing on his porch. But he says they weren't wearing costumes and they were the strangest children he had ever seen. He said their skin was waxy and ghostly white. Their eyes were completely black. Their teeth were jagged and were almost too big to fit inside their mouths. And they were just wearing normal clothes, plaid shirts, jeans, shoes. So confused, the man asked them,
"What are you two supposed to be? Some sort of monsters?"
And the children's faces turned into this giant grin as they said,
"No. Today we're dressed as humans."
So he slammed the door, ran inside absolutely terrified, and they started pounding on his door for what seemed like half an hour. And then suddenly it stopped and he never saw those kids ever again. So yeah, just look out for black-eyed children on Halloween. Be careful, guys. This next story is called the Halloween costume. This is about a 10-year-old girl who was very, very sick with a fever on Halloween, and the doctor had given her mother strict instructions to make sure that she stayed in bed to get better. Now, unfortunately, there was a Halloween party going on downstairs and she had to miss out on all the fun. So while she was sick, lying in bed trying to sleep, she could hear people laughing downstairs, she could hear the music downstairs. That would be horrible. Now, as she lied in her bed, she had this very strange feeling. Dark shadows gathered in the corners of her room as she tried to tell herself that they were all in her head. And suddenly there was a knock on her bedroom door and the door slightly creaked open to reveal her uncle's face. He was just just checking up on her to make sure that she was okay.
How's the party going?
She asked him.
It's good. I'm actually just about to put on my Halloween costume to scare everybody out of their wits.
Is it really scary? Can I see it?
Yeah, it's extremely scary and it might scare you too much.
But she pleaded with him to see his scary Halloween costume once he had put it on. So he finally agreed.
Alright, once I get dressed up, I'll come in and show you my costume, but you have to promise that you won't be too scared.
So she nodded and he left the room. Suddenly everything seemed eerily quiet and she could no longer hear anything coming from downstairs. The room was very dark, the shadows in the corners of her room were growing again. And just then she heard the sound of her bedroom door opening and scuffling on her floor. And she noticed this figure in the shadows of her room. The figure was so small, no higher than a table. It was crouched on the ground with its back turned to her. It almost looked like it was covered in this black cloak. The figure slowly turned to face her, and she was trying her best not to show how frightened she was because she told her uncle she would not be afraid of his costume. But the face was hideous. It was a dead, pale face with a long pointed nose. There were no eyes, just small black holes in the mask. And her uncle was right. His costume was too scary and she actually began to panic. She was staring at the horrible mask as it got closer and closer. It was basically right beside her bed, so she couldn't take it anymore and threw the covers over her head. And just before she was about to scream, she heard a knock on her bedroom door.
Okay, I'm ready. Can I come in now?
It was her uncle at the door. And that's how the story ends. So clearly whatever creature was in her bedroom was not her uncle in the costume. So that story was definitely kind of creepy and I feel so bad for this girl. Like, she's sick and she has a monster in her room. All right, and the last creepypasta is called The Mask That Stayed. And this is the one about the costume that would not come off. This story is about a kid who went to a secondhand shop to get a Halloween costume. He was searching through bins of old masks when finally he came across one that he was instantly drawn to. It was this red skull looking mask that had this large smiling mouth with sharp teeth. And what was strange was when he brought it up to the cashier took one look at it and was like,
"Oh, that one. You can have that one for free."
And as strange as that was, the boy was just happy he was able to get a free Halloween costume. And I don't know about you guys, but if a cashier looked at the mask I was trying to buy like that, I probably wouldn't buy it. He went to a Halloween party that night, proudly wearing his new mask around, hoping it would scare some of his friends. And he got so many compliments that night about how freaky it was. People even said it looked too real. That night when he got home, he went into the washroom to shower and tried to take his mask off. But the thing is, it wouldn't budge. And he found it strange because he didn't put the mask on with glue or anything. He literally just put the elastic loops around his ears. But now it wasn't coming off, and he was tugging at his mask on his face for what seemed like ages. He eventually had to stand in the shower in the hot water hoping that would help. And after a while, it finally started to peel off. And when he looked in the mirror afterwards, his face was so red it almost looked like it was completely covered in rashes and blisters. He went to bed, and in the morning his face felt so itchy and sore. And when he felt his cheeks, he got so worried because his skin felt thick and bumpy and just rubbery and strange. He ran into the washroom, and as soon as he looked into the mirror, his heart stopped. The red mask was growing back on his face, poking through his skin slowly and forming once again. How horrible would that be? And that's how the story ends. So it's almost like even though he can peel off the mask, it will just grow back through his skin anyways. Imagine always being a red skeleton. No, thank you. And before I end this video, I really want to show you this comic style story that I found online that's so creepy, and here's how it goes. "Good night, pumpkin, sleep tight." So this father is like tucking in his child and she says, "But dad, there's a monster in the closet." So he walks over to the closet and he's like, "I promise you there are no monsters here." And then he opens the closet and sitting there is his daughter and she says, "Dad, there's someone in my bed." So it's like, which one's the actual monster? The one in the closet or the one in the bed? What the heck? Alright guys, so let's talk about some very creepy old Halloween toys that people used to get. The first one is called the Haunted House playset. Now, during my research, I found out that this set was actually one of the most popular toys to get back in the 60s and 70s. They would like fly off the shelves back in October. This particular one is from 1975, and it's super rare to find anyone who has the complete set nowadays. And apparently you can only sell it for a lot of money if you have every single piece from this set. If you're missing one piece, you can't sell it. And what's interesting is that on the instruction sheet, there's literally a zombie telling you how to build the house. So yeah, I feel like if I was a kid growing up around that time, I would love to have this. The next creepy toys are called Boglins. The Boglins were a line of creepy hand puppet monster toys that came out in 1987. They were inspired by the Jim Henson movies The Dark Crystal and Fraggle Rock. And these Boglin toys were supposed to look like they just came out of a movie. Like they were supposed to look like real life goblins. They were made of flexible rubber, and this allowed them to be manipulated to make expressive movements that you controlled. So your hand would literally control its mouth like a literal puppet, and you can act out them talking, and the way you moved your hand around made them look angry or sad or happy. Flexible rubber is great for that. They even had rotten pumpkin Boglins that came out around Halloween. And yeah, this toy just made people feel like they actually had a pet monster. Why do I actually want one of these? I was looking to actually buy one on eBay, but they're being sold for like $400 now. So here are some of their names. They're so cute. There's Squidge, Schlump, Schlurp, Sponk, Squeak, and Squeal. That is so hard to say, but yeah, I want a pet monster, guys. Next, we have the Halloween noisemakers, and the only reason I'm bringing these up is because these were also extremely popular to use on Halloween nights, specifically when you were trick-or-treating or at a Halloween party. These were so popular back in the 1930s and 1940s, and people would walk the streets on Halloween night making a ton of noise. Now, every noisemaker you could buy was so different and so unique. There was not one that was the same. They had different shapes, different things on them, like witches, black cats, bats, creatures, monsters, and noisemakers are so loud. Have you ever heard them? Have you ever been to a New Year's Eve party? They'll blow your ears out. Next, we have the pocket fortune teller. Now, I actually talked about this toy, I think a year ago, very briefly. Back in the 1940s, they had these things called pocket fortune tellers that they would really advertise around Halloween. Now, these toys were really similar to Magic 8 balls, and it's so tiny that you could literally carry it around with you. And you would basically ask it a question, shake it up, and it would reveal the answer at the very top. It just looked like this tiny can that you would carry around. I mean, imagine literally carrying this thing around in your pocket every day, and when someone asked you a question, you could just be like, hold on a second, let me just check the fortune teller I keep in my pocket. They would think you were crazy, but that's okay. Next, we have the Let's Pretend doll. Now, this was an old creepy doll set that would basically come with a doll, obviously, but it would also come with 2 or 3 masks that your doll could wear. So you would choose who you wanted your doll to be that day, and they would look so creepy with their masks on. There was a princess face, an old grandma face, a witch face, a clown face, and so many others. And during my research, I found so many people on the internet who said this doll actually really freaked them out as a kid. I would never buy a doll that it would swap its face. No thank you, I don't want a doll with masks. And lastly, we have the Witch Witch game. This was a popular Halloween board game from the 70s. It was a 3D haunted house race game where you are trying to be the first one to escape the house. But along the way, you'll draw cards that'll either turn you into a mouse or have you being chased by a witch, or basically just trying to get out of this creepy haunted house. Now, to me, this game sounds really fun, and they actually sold so many of this board game, especially around Halloween, so I think it's really cool. So let's move on to the trick-or-treating side of things. Have you guys ever seen what the old vintage trick-or-treat baskets look like? It was crazy. They were like weird humanoid pumpkin heads, and sometimes they were even made out of paper mache to look like a monster head. And I mean, at least people were very creative back then, right? But looking at all these pictures, they're kind of creepy. So I was on the internet and I found a lot of true stories of things that people found in their Halloween bags. So here's a list of things that people were given while they were trick-or-treating. Someone got potato salad in a plastic bag. Someone got a baby turtle and a can of orange soda. Someone got a small plank of wood. Someone got a packet of McDonald's croutons. Someone got a walnut that said Happy Halloween on it. Someone received live goldfish, and they weren't even in like a plastic bag. They were just dunked into their trick-or-treat bag. Could you imagine? Your candy would be soaked. These poor fish would have no idea what was going on. Someone got a package of hot dogs. Someone even got a tooth. There was this really creepy story I found about someone who got a whole pile of Reese's Pieces in their trick-or-treat bag, and when they got home and opened them all, the owner of the house had licked out all the peanut butter from inside the Reese's Pieces, put the chocolate back in, and glued them shut. Are you kidding me? So all the Reese's Pieces were literally hollow. That is disgusting. Next, I found a story called A Soul Song, and this was about a group of kids who were trick-or-treating, and they went to this one specific house, and sitting on the porch was this woman who was dressed as an angel, and she had a harp in her hands. She wasn't giving out candy for some reason and beckoned the kids to come up on her porch. She told them to sit on a bench across from her, and she told them she would play their soul song on her harp. Now obviously they had no idea what a soul song was, so she told them she would just sit there and pluck the strings of her harp, and whatever sound came out was what their soul song was. Now she said she had no idea how to play the harp. This was her first time, but she said for some reason whatever came out, the music that came out, would be their soul song. And these people said it was the creepiest night of their entire lives because the sounds coming from the harp were so eerie, and for some reason it actually resonated with them. So guys, comment down below, if you went up to a house and a lady was just sitting there playing the harp for you, would you like actually listen to what your soul song was? I wonder what mine would sound like. And before I end the video, I want to tell you guys something super embarrassing since we're talking about weird things that people have found in their trick-or-treat bags. So when I was a kid, probably like 7 years old, I would say, maybe 6 years old, I loved to draw, I loved to color. I was a very creative kid, and I knew Halloween was coming up, and I really wanted to make all of the trick-or-treaters who came to our door these little tiny booklets of my coloring stuff. So like a week before Halloween, I sat down and made probably about 30 or 40 little booklets. So I took paper, stapled it all together, made a little book, and on each page I would like draw something like a tree or an apple or a squirrel or just like a random thing, and I would write what it was. I would be like, this is an apple, and I would like draw an apple on one page. It took me so long to do, and I was so into it, but obviously like 6-year-old drawings are terrible, but you think you're amazing back then. And so all these older kids were like coming to our door on Halloween like asking for candy, and I was giving them these little booklets that I made thinking that it was just so cool and they would love it. And then like the next day when I was out like walking around through the neighborhood, I saw these booklets like thrown on the side of the road and like in the grass, and they were like in puddles and stuff, and I was so sad because I put so much effort into it. Why am I getting emotional about this right now? But I mean, can you really blame those trick-or-treaters? Like all they want is candy. They don't want like a little coloring book a 6-year-old made. But yeah, to this day I'm still kind of hurt about it. I'm going to be talking about strange phenomenons, anomalies, weird things about photographs from the past. I believe 2 of these are from the 1900s and 2 are from the 1800s. Now, before I show you these photos, they are said to be urban legends. So I'm 90% sure that these photos have been manipulated for the legend or the story. But I want you guys to tell me what you think, because I'm also 10% unsure. Maybe they aren't real. Okay guys, this first photo is called Lily Palmer's Eyes. So there's this story about this little girl named Lily Palmer, and when she was about 4 years old, she experienced what doctors called sensory hallucinations. And her very first episode of this actually happened on Halloween night of 1952. Lily and her nanny were about to head out for a round of trick-or-treating when they decided to first pose for a photograph. But suddenly, Lily started to scream and began to claw at her eyes, and you can see all of this commotion happening in this photo. And when her nanny was just shocked and asked her what the heck she saw to make her react this way, Lily repeatedly spoke about things crawling in her eyes. And then several days later, while unsupervised in her bedroom, Lily took 2 of her mother's knitting needles and put them in her eyes. Obviously, she went and received medical treatment. She was then evaluated and committed, and she remained institutionalized for the rest of her life. She eventually died of a heart attack in March of 2001, and the doctors that took care of her said that her episodes were most traumatic on and around Halloween night, and they couldn't figure out why. But for the majority of her life, she could be heard begging and pleading with the staff at this hospital, telling telling them, "Get these things out of my eyes right now." And there was never anything in her eyes, or so no one could ever see. And the reason why people are so freaked out about this story is not only, I mean, do they feel sad for her and sorry for her, because obviously this would be a terrible thing to have to go through for your entire life. People were also scared about the fact that this would really only happen around Halloween, or on Halloween night specifically, it would be the worst. And no one knew how to explain that phenomenon. So people did wonder, was it just something medical, or was it something supernatural, paranormal, something bad in that sense happening to her? Then we have the ghost of Sarah Eustace. Danvers State Lunatic Asylum was a psychiatric hospital built in 1874 on what was then an isolated site in rural Massachusetts. It was famous for its Gothic architecture and its use of now outdated medical techniques to treat insanity, and it is often cited as the birthplace of the prefrontal lobotomy, which is like the worst thing ever. I won't even show you photos of that. The creepiest part about this place is that there is a vast network of tunnels beneath it, and they are rumored to be incredibly haunted. And the most famous story about these haunted tunnels talks about this patient named Sarah Eustace, and she ended up escaping her ward in 1955, and she snuck down into the tunnel system to see if she can escape from down there, see if she can find some sort of exit. But despite multiple searches and a week-long lockdown of the asylum, Sarah was never seen again. It was assumed that she died down there, lost, thirsty, and alone. Well, there was this nurse at the asylum. Her name was Gail Malloy, and she became very obsessed with the case about Sarah Eustace, and she spent many of her off hours searching the tunnels for her remains, and though she never found a body, she did snap this photo in late 1966, which suggests Sarah Eustace walks the Danvers tunnels to this very day. So this is supposed to be a real photograph of Sarah's ghost being caught on film. And like I said, it's kind of hard to verify if this is legit or not, which is why I'm asking you guys what you think. Does this photo look real enough to be an actual ghost caught on camera? Then we have a story called The Grand Caverns Cryptids. So there was this photograph taken in 1895 by a photographer named Orangeville while he was exploring an unmapped section of Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. At the time it was taken, Jeffries was conducting photographic experiments using these super long exposures to see if anything at all could be captured in complete darkness of the cave, because there was total absence of light here, otherwise known as cave darkness. So he would situate himself on level ground, extinguish his lantern, and then open the lens of his homemade box camera for as long as he could stand in the darkness. And during one of these very creepy experiments, he heard something begin to approach him from the deeper recesses of the cave. And as soon as he heard that, he turned back on his lantern. So he took off running in the other direction and didn't return back to the cave for several days. Now he had to return with a bunch of people to retrieve his cameras. And when he went to develop his images, this photo was recorded on the film inside of his camera, and it is so creepy. You can see all the eyes of these humanoid creatures just staring at him. And like, this is like the most haunting image I've ever seen. It is so eerie, and if this is real, I never want to be near a cave ever again. Okay, and then lastly, we have a story called Charlie Noonan's Last Interview. So Charlie Noonan was a folklorist who traveled through the southwestern United States during the early years of the 20th century. He would basically go around collecting tall tales and legends of the supernatural. Charlie was told a story one day by an Oklahoma farmer about a strange woman who lived alone on an isolated property. The farmer claimed that the woman was not a woman at all, but something else, something that hid its true nature beneath a headscarf and was never seen without a large dog by its side. And Charlie was apparently intrigued enough that he really wanted to go and search for this woman on one of his road trips. And after going searching one day, he never ever returned again. His wife was later contacted by a pawnbroker after finding Charlie's name engraved on a camera that he had found. The pawnbroker gave the camera back to her, and she had the film inside developed in hopes of it giving her a clue as to where her husband was or where he last took a photo. And this was the only photo on the roll. Unfortunately, neither the location of the property Charlie, nor the name of the farmer who told him the story was recorded in Charlie's notes. So this photo is really haunted because it shows that he clearly found the woman who was the creepy part of this folk tale, who wore a headscarf, who had this dog, whose eyes were just really eerie. He captured this photo and then was never seen again. And that's why you don't go looking for creepy things, folks. I feel like I should take my own advice.
Children lost, ensnared by a witch's binding spell. Jessiline, the awakened soul, yearns to escape and find a new home. Dare you join her and explore more?